Hello and welcome back to Pro Tip of the Month from Crowd Running by Globee, the video series where you, our amazing crowd running pilot, gets to be the star of the show. By clicking the link in the description below, you can submit your questions about drone mapping and the Crowd Running by Globee platform. If you find the information in this video helpful, please tag us in social media @Globee and let us know how you incorporate your newly learned skills in your next gig for the chance to get featured in our social media. Now this month's question has been submitted by our crowd running pilot Gabriela from Colombia. Gabriela is asking how to set the exposure when mapping and what other camera settings affect map appearance. So without further ado, let's jump straight into it. Now Gabriela is not mentioning what drone or mapping software she is using, so for the sake of it, I will assume she has a Mavic 2 Pro and is using Drone Deploy as mapping software. Now to answer this question, we will be talking about exposure settings, the correlation between shutter speed and motion blur, as well as white balance. And to organize this, we will be starting with the most critical settings and move our way down. If you want more in-depth information on each topic, we have provided a link in the description below just for that. So first off, let's get into how to expose correctly and why it's so critical to master your exposure settings. First off, to give you an example, here is an overexposed image, which does us no good, and there is nothing we can do to repair it. To avoid this situation, there are 3 settings we can adjust to get the exposure correct. We have the aperture setting that controls how much light we let into the sensor. We have shutter speed setting that controls how long the sensor will be exposed to that light. And finally, we have the ISO setting that controls how sensitive the sensor will be to that light. All these 3 settings combined will make up your final exposure. But to not have to think about these settings, we can put them to an auto exposure program as shown on the screen. Now there is a good reason why we specifically want to put it into S exposure mode as opposed to AM or full auto. S stands for shutter priority and will let us set the shutter speed to a desired value that will not be changed when we set it. Instead, the camera will only change the aperture and ISO value to expose the image correctly. Preferably, we want to never have the shutter speed set to a lower value than 1000, as this can start to introduce what we call motion blur. Motion blur is created when the drone is moving and the camera sensor is exposed to the light source for too long relative to the speed of travel. To give you an example, here is an image taken with the drone moving fast with a shutter speed of 100, and here is the same scenario but with a shutter speed of 1000. Producing a much sharper image, which almost has no motion blur at all. Now moving to white balance, which is the final setting that will affect image appearance and the final map quality. Changing this value will affect the color temperature of the image. The lower the value, the bluer the image will look, and the higher the value, the more yellow the image will look. To get a consistent color temperature across the entire map, it is important to set the white balance to manual, and we generally want to keep the value at 5600, as this is similar to what our human eye sees during daylight and will feel the most natural in most scenarios. To give you an example, here is a map with the white balance set to auto and automatically adjusting across the flight, compared to the same map where we had the white balance set to manual and 5600. As a result, you can see with manual white balance, we get a much more natural and consistent looking result across the map. Now besides what Gabriela was asking, I want to highlight one last important setting to be aware of. Most drones you will be able to choose the option between JPEG or RAW format. It is important to be familiar with these settings, and always use JPEG as opposed to RAW images will not be able to be processed, and they are much larger, which make them inconvenient to upload. I hope this answers your question, Gabriella. If you have any further questions, please feel free to submit them by clicking the link in the description below, and we will answer them in an upcoming video. Now have a good one, fly safe, and looking forward to see you in the next one.